What is crackling, everybody? Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by Numberfire. That is right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and Numberfire.com, as we are taking a look back at Week 14 and breaking down all the big takeaways for NFL DFS. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for Numberfire.com, joined here, as always, by Brandon Gadula. He is a managing editor for Numberfire. Brandon, Week 14 is mostly in the books. How are you doing today?
Well, I had zero Drew Brees. I had A.J. Brown was the last guy I took out. I was like, I don't want to play all these receivers. So I'm like,
yeah,
A.J. Brown, he's going to get 18% of the targets, and Tannehill's going to throw it about 8 times. So I was like, I can do without. That's how my week went, basically.
Yeah,
it was fine, but I didn't have some of the guys I needed to have.
Yeah, I had 2 of my staple running backs. Like, I think I had 4 guys who were like my main running backs. 2 of them were on teams that got blown the F out, which is always good, and just didn't play like the fourth quarter. And Christian McCaffrey and Leonard Fournette. I guess McCaffrey did get some garbage time there, but Fournette just did not play the fourth quarter because that game was totally dust. But it was all Nick Foles' fault, of course, obviously. That was annoying for sure, but like, that's kind of the risk you take when you use guys on bad teams. So it was a risk I brought upon myself. And, I think that's fine. I had some Garoppolo, but no Breeze, kind of as you were discussing. So it was not a great week for sure. And I think part of it was self-inflicted, which I don't know. Maybe like this is weird, but I feel better about it when it's my fault than when it's like bad luck. I don't know if that's weird. But I like to know that I had control of it. It was in my hands, and I messed up. And, like, for some reason, that makes me feel better about it.
Yeah, then it feels like you can get back and make the right decisions. Sometimes you just run bad. Sometimes your guys are getting tackled inside the 5, and they'll get Darren Waller was tackled on the 1. He's in my main lineup, and like that stuff happens. But it's more. I should have had Drew Brees. I just should have had some Drew Brees.
Yeah, I think if we had gotten confirmation that Terron Armstead would be like healthy prior to like inactives coming out, which there wasn't, there was confirmation that he was like warming up like a half an hour before inactives. But that was pretty much the only word that I saw. But like I was doing these like Twitter searches on Terron Armstead like all morning, and it was enough for me to feel good about my Alvin Kamara lineups. But it didn't get me into Drew Brees. So definitely rough there. And then it was also rough watching Ryan Tannehill like actually ball out. Like, I've been wrong on a lot of quarterbacks. I don't know if I've whiffed as badly as I have with Ryan Tannehill saying this dude is bad. Eventually this will all come crashing back to earth. Like that throw to A.J. Brown, that like long touchdown was one of the dirtiest throws I've seen in my entire life. So I know he doesn't care, but I'm sorry I underestimated you, Ryan Tannehill. You're actually good. So there's that. Although I did that same thing with Daniel Jones, and that we saw that worked out. But I think Tannehill's more legit. It's a larger sample.
Yeah, a little bit. Not one game.
Yeah, a little bit. We're going to break down Week 14 and all the big takeaways here in just 1 second. But first, quick reminder, we're doing this every Monday and Thursday here on the Numberfire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed and on the FanDuel YouTube page. The Monday podcast recorded at 9 a.m. Eastern, and the Thursday podcast will be at 10 a.m. Eastern. Make sure you are subscribed to the Numberfire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed to get that podcast right as it is posted. You can get that wherever you get your podcast. You can also get the Daily ISO with Tom Vecchio, an NBA DFS podcast that goes up every weekday. And while you're there, please leave a rating and review as well, because those do help us out a ton. And Brandon, 1 week from today, we'll be recording this podcast, or at least I will, from Puerto Rico. So it'll be a little bit different than the awkward backdrop behind me. So we'll be at the World Fantasy Football Championship. Looking forward to that. You'll be in Pennsylvania, so I feel bad talking about how I'll be in Puerto Rico, but like it should be a good time.
Yeah, I'll be trying not to slip on the ice as I go get my mail, but that will be probably the only time I leave the house, just to walk about 8
and that is
steps
a
to the
plus.
mailbox.
Yeah, not leaving the house is always a plus. But I am excited to go down to Puerto Rico for that. So if you're at the WFFC, make sure you swing by. I'll be hanging out with the FanDuel social team for the entire weekend. Let's break down the Thursday night game between Dallas and Chicago. Brandon, we talked on the Thanksgiving podcast about how Mitchell Trubisky was playing a little bit better. And he played a little bit better once again here. Not a tough matchup. Dallas's defense, once you adjust for schedule, has not been a good one this year, but Trubisky looks a lot better now than he did in the past. What else do you see in this game?
Yeah, this was kind of a blowout, but it was close in the first quarter. But I mean, there was a lot of garbage time at the end, so Dallas got some fantasy production. But I'll just start with the Bears because they looked better and they deserve it here. Trubisky, 244 yards for him, 3 touchdowns. He was 4 times the NFL average in per drop back efficiency based on number fires metrics. Since returning, he's got 13 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. The overall efficiency's been below average, but I think for me, the most important thing is that he ran 10 times. He has 7, 4, and 10 attempts his past 3 games. He's running the ball again. That gives him fantasy potential. He looked good. He looked athletic. He looked healthy. In 2 games without Taylor Gabriel here, Allen Robinson has a 29% target share now. Anthony Miller's at 25%. Tariq Cohen is at 15%. Javon Wims at 13%. Robinson has 6 of the 11 deep targets. Miller has 3. So this offense really has been Allen Robinson primarily all season. But Anthony Miller now is their number 2. And Robinson really is now having some like surefire wide receiver 1 usage. Trubisky's playing better. He's running. So, I mean, that's a pretty decent stack. I feel a lot better stacking Trubisky and Robinson than I did earlier on. David Montgomery here may have a leg injury. I haven't really found a clear update. I know he's been battling some lower body injuries earlier this year, but he played 64% of the snaps on Thursday in positive script, had 20 carries, 1 empty target. He's not super relevant for me in DFS unless we know for sure the Bears will move the ball and play with a lead. Tariq Cohen had 6 targets, played 47% of the snaps. So I do think this Bears offense is trending up with Trubisky playing better, looking healthier over the past 2 weeks. They're at the Packers in Week 15, so it's a divisional game, which I don't always love to target in DFS if I can avoid it. Again, 13 games on the main slate. You don't have to load up on it. For the Cowboys here, they keep disappointing against good opponents. We all kind of know that their win-loss record against good teams is not great. But, I mean, the box score looked fine in the end. Ezekiel Elliott, 19 carries, 5 targets in a game where they trailed, which pretty good sign for his receiving role. He has 40 or more routes in 3 of his past 4 games, according to Pro Football Focus. Doesn't always get the targets, but, had 10 on Thanksgiving, 5 this week. So I think we're trending back up for Ezekiel Elliott. And he did score twice on the ground. So, again, I'm looking at this as a positive for Ezekiel Elliott. For Dak Prescott, he got up to 334 yards, threw almost 50 times, just 1 touchdown. His targets were 10 for Michael Gallup, 8 for Amari Cooper, 7 for Blake Jarwin and Jason Witten, 5 for Randall Cobb and Ezekiel Elliott. He really spread out the 11 downfield targets. Gallup did lead with 3. Cooper and Cobb had 2. In 6 games since the bye, Gallup leads the team with a 20.5% target share, followed by Amari Cooper at 20.1%. I know Cooper's missed some time in there, but nobody really gets a huge market share right now for this team. We talked about it on the Thanksgiving pod. It's kind of, Michael Gallup, Amari Cooper, and Randall Cobb, all things considered, kind of getting similar usage, which is a little bit underwhelming for Amari Cooper at his price. But I mean, with the market shares kind of even among the receivers, Elliott's production still kind of capped with, we don't know if the receiving is going to be there every week. The Cowboys just not a go-to offense for me right now in DFS. When the matchups there, I like them, but they have enough question marks where I view them as matchup dependent. And they host the Rams next week, and the Rams defense, pretty good.
Yeah, and they looked really good last night. I want to go back to Mitchell Trubisky because you talked about his rushing. Earlier this year, through the first 11 weeks, his maximum rush attempts per game in a game was 4, and he had not exceeded 15 rushing yards. Since then, he's gone 7 attempts, 4 attempts, and 10 attempts, and 63 yards on Thursday night. And last year when Trubisky had these ceiling games where he was like actually being a kind of like a must-have DFS asset, a lot of it was because of his rushing. Is it to the point where you will now use him in DFS in more middling matchups? Or, because I think that we'd both agree that he's in play for plus matchups now, would you go there in a more middling matchup, or do you need to see more before you fully commit to that?
Yeah, I needed it to be like a tiny slate, a single game slate for me to want to play Mitchell Trubisky. But I mean, yeah, now if it's even like a decent, like a middling matchup, like you said, the rushing, you get You get 63 rushing yards, even 40 yards. That's an extra passing touchdown. I mean, that stuff racks up. We both value it, and he will never be priced like an elite quarterback. Yeah. So I think that I'm definitely more okay playing Trubisky in sort of those average matchups. What about you?
Yeah, I think I agree. Where I'm at least considering him now, whereas in the past it was hard to consider him even in plus spots. But I think it's not even just like the Thanksgiving game in this game. Like the first Detroit game, he played decently well there. Then he had that terrible game against the Rams. And then the Giants game showed a couple flashes too. He still had a bad pick. Like he's still going to make bad plays because like there's nothing stable about Trubisky. But if he can still have good plays too, I think that kind of counteracts that. So I'm feeling a lot better about him. I think he's intriguing. I think that he does upgrade this entire offense too, as you alluded to, with Allen Robinson and Anthony Miller. Has Miller done enough where you'll use him if Gabriel plays? Do you think that role will be steady enough after that or no?
I want it to be because I like Anthony Miller, but I don't trust it. And now we're looking at such big slates that's the kind of situation where Anthony Miller's probably not going to erupt if Taylor Gabriel does start to eat into his usage. So
right. For sure. We will talk more about the Cowboys on Thursday, I assume, because we're going to be talking about that Rams-Cowboys game, a game I actually like quite a bit. We'll talk about that on Thursday. We still got 3 more weeks left of the NumberFire FanDuel free play where you can win NumberFire premium subscriptions and cash. The top 3 spots will all get free access to NumberFire Premium, and the top 5 spots get some cash as well. To enter the Week 15 contest, make sure you check out our Thursday preview podcast and listen for the URL again. This free play is exclusively for FanDuel Podcast Network listeners. Let's move now to Baltimore at Buffalo. Lamar Jackson was in a tough spot here. He was on the road, facing a tough defense and high winds, and Mark Andrews left early, and it did show in his efficiency stats. He was still fine for fantasy, though. If he's in literally the worst situation possible, and I think this was pretty close to that, you can pedal back exposure. But outside of that, it's always wise to at least have some exposure to him. Like his per dropback numbers were still fine, so a long Hayden Hurst play, but this was definitely not Lamar Jackson's best day as a passer. But given the circumstances, that's pretty easy to understand. So still status quo with him. He's awesome. And the only time where I lower my thoughts on him a bit is when he is in the worst situation possible. As mentioned, Mark Andrews got hurt early in the game and did not return, and that led to a pretty dispersed target tree. Willie Snead and Seth Roberts, our favorite DFS assets, tied for the team lead with 4 targets. Hayden Hurst had a long touchdown. Nick Boyle scored 2, but those guys had just 3 targets. Marquise Brown had 3 targets for -2 yards. Brown hasn't scored more than 17 FanDuel points since week 1. He's hit double digits just twice in that span. So if Andrews does miss time, it may open up some more targets here, but it really does seem like the best way to use Lamar Jackson is by himself. And Andrews sounds like he will be fine, at least based on the initial reports. So I would stack him with Andrews still. But if Andrews can't go, I might just be inclined to use Jackson by himself. Mark Ingram had 15 of 22 running back carries to go with 3 targets. It seems like the best script for Mark Ingram is in a tight game, which is what they had on Sunday. If they're down, it'll skew towards Justice Hill. If they're up big, it'll be Gus Edwards. And that can be viable at times. If you project the game to be close, Ingram maybe is a guy you could consider, but his floor will always be low. He needs an ideal scenario to hit his ceiling. He is still not someone I really want to use all that much. Josh Allen was also facing a very good defense in tough weather, which is what we were mentioning with Lamar Jackson, but his performance was much worse than Jackson's. He lost 18.54 passing net expected points, and Jackson was above 0 for the day. It's a good reminder that Josh Allen is better than he was last year, but he's still matchup dependent and he's still volatile, and that's good to keep in mind for sure. That negative script, though, did lead to big usage from Devin Singletary. He had 17 carries and 8 targets. The 8 targets were his most this season, and his 81% snap rate was as well. Singletary is going to be heavily involved when they're trailing or in a neutral script, which is awesome. He is averaging 24.2 adjusted opportunities per game since his role changed. Again, that's carries plus 2x targets. That will work in the right spots. So keep him on your list and at least give him some consideration in the right scenarios. John Brown really did suffer the ills of Allen struggling here. He was held below 40 receiving yards for the 3rd straight game. He's fine. He will bounce back up soon, and he's still the only guy I want to use here. So I think no real change for me on the Brown or the Bills, just a good reminder that they are kind of Like, they're still matchup dependent. I don't have any takeaways from the Ravens either. Pretty much status quo. Any changes for you there, Brandon?
No, I think you covered it. Where I think the best way to play Lamar Jackson right now is by himself. It's probably been that way.
Yeah.
I mean,
I would still use Andrews. Like, it's not, there are bad games in his range of outcomes, but I think that Andrews with Jackson and Jackson by himself are on a similar level to me.
Sure. But Jackson's just one of those quarterbacks where you really don't have to stack.
No, you definitely don't have to. You can, I think, with Jackson or with Andrews, but we'll see. And it sounds like he'll be okay. Let's move now to Carolina and Atlanta. Woof. Yuck. Brandon, talk me through this game. It was another banner day for Kyle Allen.
Yeah, he's like your nemesis now, but I mean, this one was 40 to.
He's tanking guys I like to use, man.
Yeah, it's tough. I mentioned before the Panthers are like one of those offenses where they're not good, but I like to use all their players. And it's been tough. But I mean, I'm gonna talk about the Falcons first. They had Julio Jones back. He didn't do a ton. 66 yards on a team high, 8 targets is a fine game, nothing major. He's dealing with an injury, shoulder injury. I mean, you don't have to pay up for Julio Jones right now, I don't think, if he's not going to be himself. But obviously the eruption games are going to be there. I said entering this week he has a low floor but a high ceiling. I'm still viewing him that way. Austin Hooper also returned. He had 6 targets, 32 yards for him. These guys are going to get healthier, so we'll kind of play it by ear. But there could be significant openings here with Calvin Ridley because he left the game with what's being called an abdominal pain or an abdominal injury, but nobody seems to know what's going on with him. So he could be out a while. I don't want to speculate, but something's weird. I mean, and Calvin Ridley has emerged as a go-to target for this offense. So we do have 3 games with Hooper healthy, no Mohamed Sanu. In those, Julio Jones leads with a 25% target share. Hooper and Russell Gage are at 16%. Ridley is at 15%. And Devontae Freeman, who played in all of them, is at 14%. So it's kind of flat after Julio, but Ridley does get a lot of downfield work still. He leads that, in that sample and average target depth. So he'd be the second guy if he's healthy, followed by Hooper. But I have no problem putting Hooper number 2 behind Julio Jones. Matt Ryan's been fine this year. He's been average, so we don't need to chase this offense into bad matchups. And I think that's why I'm so underwhelmed. I don't ever feel like I have to play the Falcons anymore. Devontae Freeman, though, we mentioned him as kind of having a really high, usage, a good workload for the price, and he got 17 carries and 4 targets, 94 total yards. His first rushing touchdown since his 2 games back. He's played 67%, 68% of the snaps. I mean, he's been that guy each week early on in the season. Seems like that's what he's going to be moving forward. They are at the 49ers next week, so probably going to be light on the Falcons outside of stacks. For the Panthers, second straight pedestrian game, I should say, for Christian McCaffrey. 22 touches, 135 yards, no touchdowns. Played every snap, I think. I mean, very close, if not. Sometimes the numbers, change a little bit as things get finalized. But, I mean, his snap rate was up. So if we had questions about how he was going to be used after, the firing of Ron Rivera, I guess it's going to be about the same, but he's going to need to score to pay off what his price tag had been. Kyle Allen, Jim's arch nemesis, was bad again from an efficiency standpoint, but still had 293 yards on 41 attempts, had a rushing touchdown on one of his 6 attempts. He's really not the worst fantasy asset in the right spots, and I know that the efficiency is not there, but he can still get some volume. McCaffrey led the team with 12 targets, followed by committee tight end Ian Thomas, who had 10. DJ Moore had 6. Jarius Wright had 5. Curtis Samuel had just 4. Thomas has a legitimate shot to be a relevant DFS asset if Greg Olson's out, but I don't know what the committee report was, but it scared me off. Gosh. DJ Moore has 27% of the team's targets in 7 post-bye games. McCaffrey's at 24%. Curtis Samuel, 18%. I think it's a pretty simple offense. McCaffrey's a stud with his workload, but he's still really pricey, I would assume. I don't know his price. I'll probably ask you to name that price.
I saw.
Okay. DJ Moore is getting wide receiver 1 treatment from a subpar passer, Ian Thomas could definitely be a viable cheap tight end. So I don't really hate this offense. Still, it was the Seahawks in Week 15. So I was going to ask you about McCaffrey's price, but now I guess I got to answer that question myself.
Well, I'll give my thoughts on him, and then you give me your salary. So I was worried that they may bundle him up a bit because they are preparing for 2020. Their owner is a super analytical guy, probably realizes the wear and tear is #not good for Christian McCaffrey, but he is chasing a record. It is the all-purpose yardage record, or the yards from scrimmage record. It's 2,500 by Chris Johnson a couple years ago, CJ2K, back when he was still CJ2K. McCaffrey, I don't want to do math, but he's at like 1,900 right now, which means he would need like a lot over the final 3 games to get there. So I think that is enough for me to think that they're still going to use him. And if they're going to use him like they have been, I'm still going to keep using him myself. So I don't know. I think I'm still worried, and I don't think that he's necessarily as safe as he was, but I still like the ceiling enough. So I still am in here. What would you pay for him right now?
So not 11,000, which is where he had been, I think, for 2 weeks now. Before that, he was 10,500. But that was before I had so many concerns about his playing time. So I'm going to bump it down and go still 10,000 because his workload should still be great, but I think we need to bake in even more concern.
And I think that 10,000 is appropriate. He is 10-4. So that's a number where it's like, okay, he's not a guy I need to target for cash games. However, he's still very in play for tournaments. Would you agree with that assessment at that salary? Okay. Yep. All right, let's move on here to San Francisco at New Orleans. Just a disgustingly fun game. Both sides here were awesome, and I am fully on board with a playoff rematch here. So please, let's make that happen. On the same side, Michael Thomas was a monster again. He had 15 targets. That is his most on the season, and he's just the best fantasy receiver in football. There's nothing that changes that. I have nothing else to say on him. He's great. The secondary guys here got some extra targets because of a Jared Cook injury. He caught 2 early touchdowns and then left due to a concussion. Ted Ginn was the guy who got the most work with 6 targets, so he would seem to be the guy who would benefit most. Traquan Smith had 4. He had a fancy touchdown pass. Apparently, he's getting healthier now, which is good. Cook missing time would make them more viable, but I'm still not all that excited to use them. Like, I would consider them more. They get a bump up, but they're still not going to be like cash game plays. Alvin Kamara struggled to get going again, and he lost a fumble. The usage was there, though. He had 13 carries and 6 targets, resulting in 43 yards from scrimmage. You always talk about how they spread out the touchdowns. And I think there is a lot of validity to that because who was it? Like Dan Arnold? No, it was Josh Hill. Josh Hill had scored. Dan Arnold's on IR. Josh Hill scored this week. But Kamara does have 2 of 4 rush attempts for them inside the 5 since he came back from his injury. No targets, though. And I think that part is a little bit fluky where he probably will get targets inside the 5. So I'm still going to go here. But your concerns about the touchdowns being spread out are founded. Those are fair. And I think that's worth noting. Yeah. You're aware. The 49ers finally had a game with all of George Kittle, Manny Sanders, and Joe Staley active for the first time in a game all year, and they flexed some muscle here. But they did lose center Weston Richburg, who was carted off with a knee injury. Kyle Shanahan said after the game that they thought it was serious, so he'll likely miss time. And that's bad. But this team has dealt with injuries all year long, and they've still been really good through it. Garoppolo finished here with 0.42 passing net expected points per dropback. That is an awesome number, especially for being on the road against a good defense. I was buying Jimmy G going into this game, and I'm going to keep on doing so, given how well he played, even when they were banged up. Emmanuel Sanders led here with 9 targets. He had a passing touchdown, too. He's a new Mohamed Sanu. He played awesome here. In the 5 games with both Manny and Kittle active, George Kittle leads with 25% of the team's targets. Sanders is next at 23%. Then there's Deebo Samuel at 18%. Sanders also leads with 6 deep targets in that time. It's 5-game sample, so Garoppolo's still not throwing deep a whole lot, but Sanders is getting the most deep work, followed by Kittle. I would still rank Kittle higher because he fills tight end and is just a monster, but Manley definitely gets a bump up for me. And I will go at Deebo if I am stacking this team, which I probably will against Atlanta next week. Even with Matt Breida being back and Tevin Coleman starting, Raheem Mostert stayed the lead dog in the backfield. He had 10 carries and 2 targets while playing 60% of the snaps, which was higher than I expected it to be. Breida had 6 carries and 1 target. Tevin Coleman had just 3 carries and basically didn't play like the second half. Mostert is the highest guy on this list, but there are still some major red flags. They have other healthy bodies they can give it to, and they've shown this year they won't use anybody as a bell cow, but Mostert does at least get a decent bump up, given that he played 60% of the snaps, even when they had everyone active, and he's been very effective this year. So, Brandon, I want to ask you about Raheem Mostert, because I swore off this backfield last week. I might need to undo that, given the snap rate here and given how effective he has been. They are at home against Atlanta next week. Name that salary for Raheem Mostert in this 49ers offense.
Okay, so I accidentally saw it. Okay. And you seem higher on him than I am, and I just want to know what range you're thinking because I don't want to give anything away.
Does that mean it's bad?
Just let me know.
I think that he is worth $6,300 to $6,500. Oh gosh, I'm way off. I can tell by your face.
He is $7,500.
Wow, no way.
That's why, yeah.
His snap rate is similar to Aaron Jones, but Aaron Jones gets a lot more targets, and Aaron Jones, you could question whether he's worth $7,500 at times. Mostert being 75, I think, is huge and way too high, but it's so hard to write him off because he's crazy effective. He's on like the dude who is the smartest run game schemer in like the history of, that's hyperbolic, but he's a very good run game schemer. And there are things that still push me there, but that number is really, really high.
Yep, it's high. It's tough. And I mean, you mentioned Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones has to deal with, Aaron Rodgers and the passing touchdowns, but really he has to deal with Jamal Williams. Mostert still has 2 other guys in the backfield. I mean, I don't anticipate having much Mostert at that salary.
I mean, I think that like he is grading out for me much better than I thought he would. And I am bumping him up in my mind, but bumping him up to $7,500 to me is really, really hard to get to. And I think that there are a lot of paths to failure at that number. So I'm sure we'll talk more about him on Thursday, but it's a good role. It's still very scary, though. Let's move now to Cincinnati at Cleveland. Brandon, a really interesting game for Baker Mayfield. He didn't play all that well, I didn't think. There was wind here, but I read Phil Dawson, the Browns kicker, saying that the wind only matters if it's coming from one specific direction. I don't know if it's coming from that direction, but overall, a weird game for Baker and the Browns. What do you see here?
Yeah, definitely weird. I mean, 46 total points, so not terrible, but I mean,
Mayfield over. I'll take that.
Mayfield was 11 of 24, 192 yards, 2 picks, no touchdowns, but I mean, that's 8 yards an attempt. The passing net expected points per dropback, pretty decent, although if you adjust it for, being against the Bengals, not that great. 1 for 6 on deep passes. I kind of feel like this will be, it's like a Rorschach test. It's probably going to be, if you've used Baker Mayfield
bias thing.
Yeah, like if you're looking for reasons not to play Baker Mayfield, you have this. If you're looking for reasons to play him, you just kind of write this one off. So I'm not changing my view on Baker Mayfield, and I'm kind of lukewarm on him. So I'm still kind of lukewarm on him. Only Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham had more than 3 targets. Landry had 7, Beckham had 5. Reports have emerged that Beckham's been dealing with a sports hernia this season. Very painful, apparently. So that is just some news that we have. In 5 games with Kareem Hunt in the lineup, Landry leads with 30% of the targets. Beckham is at 26%. Hunt himself is at 18%. Landry and Beckham have combined for 29 of 35 deep targets from Mayfield in this sample. They're the 2 guys to target. As far as the pass catchers go, they both have really good workloads. And so if we can buy in on Baker Mayfield in a particular matchup, those 2 guys definitely stand out. David Njoku here played 38% of the snaps in his return, had 3 targets. I think we just kind of monitor him, really. Nick Chubb played 72% of the snaps this week. So his snap rates have been 81%, 72, 57, 59, and 72 in 5 games with Hunt in the lineup. So still at least half the snaps, at least 70% in 3 of those 5 games. He had a 15-9 carry lead over Hunt. It's not a super solid lead necessarily for being like the run first guy, the early down rusher, but it's still at 106 yards and touchdowns. Chubb has carved out a 99-33 carry lead over Hunt in games with Hunt active, but Hunt has 28 of the targets. Chubb has 12. Chubb's, I think, probably the priority still, but Hunt's taken enough work for me to be scared enough, and I kind of haven't been playing either lately. At the Cardinals next week, though, I mean, I might play some Nick Chubb. Just saying, depending on his price. For the Bengals, Joe Mixon cashed in on what had been a really good workload behind a pretty poor offensive line, a bad offense overall. Mixon's been a guy I've been eyeing up, but never having the guts to play. I should have played him this week. 23 carries, 4 targets, 186 total yards, and a touchdown. Mixon has at least 18 opportunities in 5 straight games. He's kind of like Devontae Freeman to me. Plays around 2/3 of the snaps, gets about 20 chances in a game, in a poor offense, maybe trending up, whatever. But I'm not going to go, crazy playing Joe Mixon moving forward.
The good thing is that he benefits a lot from Andy Dalton, Cordy Glenn, and John Ross being back. So it just makes the offense more efficient. And that all helps him a lot. I did use him a bit on Sunday, not enough. But I think that we should definitely be arrows up on Joe Mixon for sure, I think.
Yeah. Sorry if I didn't make that clear. I just didn't want to. Yeah. I don't want to make it sound like all in on Joe Mixon or anything.
Right. Exactly. That makes sense. Yep.
Andy Dalton here gave nobody more than 7 of his 34 targets. Alex Erickson led with a 21% target share in this game with those 7. Just for some context, Tyler Boyd had 6 targets. Tyler Eifert, Joe Mixon, Auden Tate each had 4. Tate left early after 42% of the snaps with an ankle injury, so kind of screwed things up. John Ross had 3 targets in his return. He played 64% of the snaps, so I mean, if Tate were to miss, then it kind of solves that problem. It's like the time travel paradox. Just get rid of Auden Tate, unfortunately. But Alex Erickson played 86% of the snaps. Tyler Boyd played 80%. So, I mean, I still think that this would be kind of Tyler Boyd, John Ross, and Alex Erickson for me if Tate were to miss. Still not going to love it necessarily. It's going to depend on Tyler Boyd's price, but I think it's just a roundabout way of saying that I like Tyler Boyd the most for safety, but John Ross is going to be the guy that I play over Alex Erickson for the deep potential. Host the Patriots next week. I think that's in the back of my mind where I'm not trying to get too overconfident about the Bengals on a full slate.
Yeah, Mixon trending up, but you don't need to use him in that matchup against the Patriots. Let's talk about the Browns here. I think that you kind of spelled it out well with Baker. I like Baker a lot. I was disappointed with his play on Sunday. I think that he, earlier in the year, he was playing poorly, but also had didn't get help from a supporting cast. I think he objectively didn't play that well on Sunday, which is concerning. However, they're playing indoors against Arizona next week. So I want to hear first, name that salary for Jarvis Landry, and then Nick Chubb.
Jarv. He was 73 this
72.
Week? 72. Probably about the same. I mean, I guess if you put it in the context of that game, it should be a little bit higher, but I'm probably going to be around 72 again. I don't know Nick Chubb's price this week because I didn't play him, but
he was 79.
Probably about 74, 75 because his workload hasn't been quite what it needs to be almost 8,000.
So he's not quite Marlon Mack, what Marlon Mack was back in the day, but he's like Marlon Mack, bulked up a little bit. So I would say that he is like a $7,500 back, but he is 8,000, and Jarvis Landry is 74. I would have said 75 for Jarvis. So I think that Jarvis, when you consider salaries, has the best workload on this team right now. Would you agree with that sentiment?
Yeah, Jarv having the best workload
relative to salary.
Yeah, I would definitely say that.
Odell Beckham is 72. I think that's fine.
It's fine.
It's not. I'm not actively avoiding him, but I'm also not going to actively seek him out because, at some point, production does matter, and we have an explanation for why the production has not been there. I will still use him because the volume has been there, but I'm not expecting a huge uptick all of a sudden, I guess.
No, especially if we're getting the news now that he's hurt like that.
Right.
You're not just going to magically play significantly better, I don't think.
But the Browns are an offense I think we can trust in that game.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we'll talk about them more on Thursday. We are going streaking. No, not that kind of streaking. From December 9th, which is today, I should have written today. From today through December 21st, FanDuel is rewarding you for going on a winning streak with their Santa streak. All you have to do is finish in the top 50% of an eligible contest to build your streak. If you do, great! Your streak continues. If you don't, your streak ends, and you can start a new streak the next day. At the end of the contest, you will be rewarded based on the length of your longest streak, and the user with the longest streak out of everyone will win the grand prize. Easy, right? For more details, visit FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app today. Eligibility restrictions apply. Let's move now to Indianapolis at Tampa Bay, and the Bucs got a win here, but they also lost a big piece with Mike Evans injuring his hamstring. Even with the big day on Sunday, I would still expect a downtick in efficiency with no Evans. Jameis is not dependent on efficiency, so we can still use him, but it would lower his fantasy outlook at least a bit with no Mike Evans. After Evans' injury, Justin Watson led the team with 8 targets. Chris Godwin had 7 and O.J. Howard had 5. And Watson, he's a 5th-round pick out of Penn, and he actually has a really impressive athleticism profile, especially for his size. Scotty Miller did miss this game with a hamstring injury, so a return for Miller could shake things up here, but I would be inclined to target Watson if Evans misses time, and Howard would get a bump up too because of the extra targets available. Godwin will see increased coverage, so I think it's more of a lateral move for him, maybe extra targets, but decreased efficiency. So I would say play Godwin based on the secondary that they are facing and go from there. The backfield was a disaster here. Ronald Jones and Peyton Barber split 22 carries. Jones finished with 5 targets compared to Barber's 2. I'm still staying away from there. Not a shocker. On the Colts side, Marlon Mack returned, played his usual role, slightly downgraded from usual, though. He had 13 of 18 running back carries, didn't get a target. I still think that he is what he was before. We can downgrade him a bit from where he was because they're giving, Nyheim Hines and some more carries, and Jordan Wilkins got a look too. But Mack is a guy we can trust only in very narrow situations, and I like him less when T.Y. Hilton is out. Paris Campbell came back and had 5 targets, but Zach Pascal and Marcus Johnson were the stars here. Pascal led with 9 targets. 4 of those were deep. Johnson, he's 6'1", really good speed. His role has been expanded for a bit now, so I think it's kind of sticky. Campbell's definitely beneath those guys. Pascal's still number 1 for me, followed by Jack Doyle. He didn't do a whole lot here, but I still think he's fine. And then Marcus Johnson would be 3rd, and I think that he's interesting right now. I don't know if I want to use him in DFS yet, but he has my attention. I guess that's the way that I would phrase that there. I want to talk to you, Brandon, though, about the fallout here from the Mike Evans injury. Obviously a big thing for them, and they're going on the road to face Detroit next week. What are your takeaways? What is the fallout for you with Mike Evans going down?
I mean, I'm a big Mike Evans guy, and I think that he is a main reason why this offense can do even what it does. He gets a lot of the downfield work. He's a big threat. He can make contested catches, so you kind of got to deal with him. I mean, Jameis will still fling it deep. I mean, that much we know. That much we know. The efficiency is going to be pretty less, and the efficiency already wasn't there. So, I mean, I don't typically factor in interceptions when I'm looking at quarterbacks, but there could be picks and there could be fewer first downs in this offense, and I kind of think it's I think it's a big thing here. Like,
I agree.
I'm nervous.
Like, we don't use Winston for efficiency. Like, efficiency matters at quarterback unless you're Jameis Winston. However, there's a certain tipping point where things get really bad, and I think it does downgrade him. What about Justin Watson here? Again, I like his athletic profile, and he did get a good amount of volume after Evans left. Name that salary for Justin Watson on the road next week against Detroit.
I'm just going to be lower than you. Probably you seem to be interested in him. I wouldn't pay more than like $5,500.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I don't think you're going to have to pay more than that. I think the $5,500 is like an appropriate number, and he is minimum salary.
Okay.
So I think that we're going to dig more into these Bucs receivers, but I agree with your assessment that we should downgrade the offense. I think that Chris Godwin gets dinged because of that. He is 8,400 next week, by the way, which is really high. But like, I think that despite that, we can still get some pieces in this offense. Specifically, Justin Watson is a guy that I am interested in right now.
Yeah, I mean, I will probably have a non-zero amount of Justin Watson next week.
All right, let's move on to Detroit at Minnesota. Speaking of those Lions, this game, did it happen? Like, it allegedly did. I have no confirmation that it did, though. What did you see here in what seems like a very dull game?
Well, I watch NFL Red Zone on Sundays, so that I can try to figure out what's happening in all the games. Like, get the best combination of information for this podcast. But I didn't really see this one. I don't think at all. I mean, the Vikings won 20-7. The Lions shut out until the final 2 minutes. Just not a good game. The Vikings were able to go run heavy. They had 39 rushing plays, 31 passing plays. Dalvin Cook played through his injury, as he said he would. Had 18 carries, 2 targets. Alexander Mattison had 14 carries and 2 targets. The first half split, though, was 13-5 in favor of carries for Cook. So I don't really think there's anything to worry about. The issue is that Dalvin Cook may not be 100%. He's been the victim of big leads earlier this year. Is probably going to be the case again moving forward. So there's no real change in how I'm viewing Dalvin Cook, which sounds good, but I also am just kind of inherently nervous about Dalvin Cook to a certain degree. Kirk Cousins targeted 12 different players on his 30 passes, so everything was spread out. Stephon Diggs did see 9 targets for 92 yards, but Irv Smith had 4 targets, and he was the only other Viking with at least 4. Of note, Olabisi Johnson had just 1 target, but did score on it. If you're looking for that third receiver, second receiver without Adam Thielen. And speaking of that, since week 7 without more or less Adam Thielen for all of those games, he played very minimal snaps in a few of them. Stephon Diggs has a 21% target share. Dalvin Cook is at 15%. Kyle Rudolph is at 14%. Irv Smith 14%, and BC Johnson at 13%. So, I mean, not even great for Stephon Diggs at 21% of the targets whenever you're down your team's best other pass catcher. So that's problematic for me. He's maxed out at 30% of the targets in a single game, which happened this week, but he doesn't even have double-digit targets in any of these games. So that's problematic. For just matchup purposes, I'll have to keep an eye on the Xavier Rhodes injury. He left with an ankle injury, which would potentially boost opponents playing them. They're at the Chargers next week. It is a game where I think we might see a lot of rushing attempts.
I finally bought into Kyle Rudolph, my other arch nemesis, and he got me 2 targets for 11 yards. So no Christmas cards for Rudolph again. He's banned from the hot tub.
Yeah. I mean, you can't throw the ball to 12 different guys if you're throwing 30 times.
Their center had almost as many targets as Kyle Rudolph. Like Garrett Bradbury, who is a very good athlete, I will note. Great athleticism scores for a center. Got almost as many targets as Kyle Rudolph. He is dead to me. Make Garrett Bradbury eligible on FanDuel, and I'll play him over Kyle Rudolph.
Okay, I'm just glad everything's back to normal, that you're back to hating Kyle Rudolph.
I said good things about Ryan Tannehill, though, so we're not entirely back to normal.
That's true. But Tannehill deserves it.
Yeah, he does.
All right, so for the Lions here, I mean, David Blau had a good debut on Thanksgiving against Chicago. In this game, took 5 sacks, lost almost 9 expected points. Wasn't great. No TJ Hawkinson here. He's on IR. David Blau's target distribution was heavy on Kenny Golladay, who had 8. Danny Amendola, who also had 8. And Marvin Jones, who had 7. So that helps if we're going to have not great efficiency necessarily. We need the targets to be fixated. Marvin Jones and Kenny Golladay each had 2 deep targets. So Blau's 2-week target distributions, 24% for Danny Amendola, 16% for Golladay and Jones. Golladay has 7 of 16 deep targets. Jones has 4. It's not going to be pretty, but Golladay and Marv still have some value because they're getting high leverage work. Amendola is still going to have a high target floor. Bo Scarborough left with a rib injury with about 12 minutes left. He still had 19 carries, giving him at least 14 in the past 4 games. He also had 3 targets this week after having just 1 through those first 3 games with the team. Plays about half the snaps every week, did again this week. There's just not enough juice in this offense, but, I mean, if Scarborough gets targets, I mean, you could do way worse if you're spending down at running back, but we don't really do that in this house. And they host the Bucs in Week 15, so they're not going to run the ball very well.
Yeah. Kerryon Johnson apparently is coming back, but he can't come back to Week 16. So it could be Bo Scarborough again if he's healthy. If he's not, I'm not going there. Like, I don't even – just avoid the Lions at all costs. I think that overall, pretty much status quo across the board for both sides here. I think that your concerns about Dalvin Cook are well-founded, and I agree with you. Like, that is kind of annoying where if they get up big, it's kind of like he's much better from a fantasy perspective than Mark Ingram, but it is kind of the same thing that he has with Gus Edwards. So I would just say to keep that in mind going forward with Dalvin Cook. And I agree with what you said.
Should be hunting like neutral game script for Dalvin Cook, I think.
Which they could get against the Chargers next week. Chargers played pretty well on Sunday. They're healthier now, which may actually, it's weird that the Chargers defense being healthier may actually benefit Dalvin Cook, but I kind of think that's how it is.
Yeah, 2.5 point spread. Minnesota's a road favorite.
Road.
Yeah.
Quote unquote road. Let's move now to Miami at the Jets, where Bilal Powell filled in for Le'Veon Bell, and he basically played Bell's role. He had 19 carries and 3 targets. He had more rushing yards than Bell has had in a game this year, but Powell apparently got x-rays on his foot after the game. That leaves his status pretty cloudy. If he can't go, I would say that would actually stabilize Le'Veon Bell coming off of his sickness, weirdly. If neither of those guys can go, then Ty Montgomery and Josh Adams will be the next options. I'd favor Montgomery because he get the passing down work, and I think Adams was active. I believe he was active yesterday, and Montgomery was still the guy working on their final drive. So Ty would be the guy if both Bell and Powell can't go, but Bell should be good for next week. Robbie Anderson's surge continued with a season-high 11 targets. He has hit double digits now in back-to-back games, and 6 of those 11 targets were deep, and Anderson's now to a 20% overall target share since Darnold's return. He's going to have bad games. Like, that's going to happen because so many of his targets are deep, but he is the clear stud on this team, and he is in play for tournaments almost no matter what the matchup may be, except against the Ravens next week. Yuck. Ryan Griffin banged up his ankle, and the main impact of that could be giving extra targets to Robbie Anderson, Jamison Crowder, and the running backs. I would not go at any of the tight ends if Griffin misses time. Daniel Brown is like semi-interesting. He played a lot of snaps, but I don't think I'd want to go there. I think I'd rather just go at the other wide receivers and the running backs. On the Dolphins side, tough break for Devontae Parker because he was evaluated for concussion and did not return. He's been awesome this year, so you hate to see guys playing well who get hurt. He will slide back into that role if he's healthy again. If Parker misses time, Allen Hurns and Isaiah Ford seem most likely to get volume because Albert Wilson also got banged up. Ford had 9 targets. Hurns had 8. Hurns had 3 deep targets compared to Ford's 2. Parker missing time would downgrade everybody here, kind of the same thing as Mike Evans, where he's just a really good player and losing him hurts the offense. But Hurns and Ford could be considered as potential value plays in the right spots. Albert Wilson also missed time due to injury, so if he's able to play next week, then I would downgrade Ford. But I think that Allen Hurns, if Parker can't go, is at least very interesting in a spot where, like, I mean, they're just staying in Jersey. I don't think they'll stay there, but like they're back in Jersey next week to face the Giants. So not a bad matchup. I would keep a close eye on Devontae Parker. Patrick Laird handled most of the backfield work here for the Dolphins with 15 carries and 5 targets. He actually got some yardage, 86 yards from scrimmage for Patrick Laird while playing 82% of the snaps. He's not going to be efficient, but he's probably better than Kalen Ballage. If the salary stays low for Laird, there are worse players you could use. I would just say don't be overconfident in a running back in this offense, but his usage was objectively very good, and he may be better than Kalen Ballage. So I don't know. I think he's at least interesting. The Jets are not on the main slate, so I want to ask you about Laird, Brandon, because you were willing to use Ballage earlier this year. Would you use Patrick Laird against the Giants?
Sure. I mean, it's going to depend on what kind of value opens up, but if you need one value running back to make everything else work, I think Laird, because of the targets, 5 targets, I mean, we know that he can get receiving work, so that helps. I mean, that total already dropped, even though the Giants haven't played yet. It's 47.5. I mean,
it's not bad.
It's not bad. So,
what would Laird's salary need to be for you to consider him?
Like, probably no more than 6,000, I guess.
Don't worry, he's $5,500.
Okay.
He's weirdly interesting. I have a dynasty league where I'm hoping to advance. I might need to use Patrick Laird next week. These are wild days.
The tail end of every season is always like this.
Yeah. It was Bilal Powell this week trying to carry the team. Next week it might be Patrick Laird. What could go wrong? Let's move now to Denver at Houston. Just a weird game here. But Drew Lock played pretty well, benefited from some broken plays for sure, which I think will inflate things for him. But, looking pretty good so far. And I remember being called an idiot for thinking he'd be an upgrade over Brandon Allen. Good times. What'd you see here?
Yeah, I think the best news out of this game is that Noah Fant, who got carted off with a foot injury, said that he'll be good for next week. The x-rays were negative. That helps because Noah Fant is amazing, and I love him. And he had 113 yards and a touchdown on 4 targets this week. He can get yardage upside as a tight end, and that is rare, and I love it. Cortland Sutton led with 7 targets, but was held to 34 yards on 5 catches. Deshaun Hamilton tied Fant with 4 targets. Tim Patrick had 3 targets of his own. I mean, we know Drew Lock has had plus efficiency. It's not all been great necessarily, but it has been plus efficiency, and that is something that's definitely good to see. Through 2 games with Lock, Sutton has 23% of the targets. Fant and Deshaun Hamilton are tied at 13% for second place. Jeff Hireman and Royce Freeman have 11% of the targets, so it's been kind of spread out, and that was my concern. Brandon Allen really threw the ball to Cortland Sutton and Noah Fant. Drew Lock has not quite done that yet. Sutton does have 4 of 10 deep targets in the sample. I mean, again, I know it's small samples. Last week was low volume against the healthy Chargers defense, but I'm a little bit weirdly lower on this offense because I can't trust Cortland Sutton and Noah Fant quite to that degree. But Drew Lock is elevating the offense, so it's kind of good and bad. I don't know. Phillip Lindsay continues to lead the backfield in carries. He had 16 this week. Royce Freeman had 8. Lindsay scored, each had 2 targets. Lindsay's now up to a 62-23 carry lead over Freeman in 4 post-bye games. Andy leads 10-9 in targets, so he's definitely the guy if you're picking between them, but I don't necessarily go out of my way to target Phillip Lindsay very often. Again, just jumping back to Lock quickly, 0.4 passing and expected points per dropback. The NFL average about 0.08, so he's been very, very good. He's going to regress, but again, it's going to elevate this offense. And the reason that that's important is because they're at Kansas City next week, and they're going to probably have to move the ball. And I think Drew Lock is much more likely to do it than Brandon Allen ever was.
Well, it's good, too, because we want them to score points to keep Patrick Mahomes chucking. And I think Lock is more capable of that than Allen was. So, like you said, he'll regress, but it's at least a positive.
Yeah. And regress doesn't mean he'll become bad.
Correct.
He could regress to league average or a little bit better than league average.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So for the Texans, I mean, for all of their issues, their 2 main pieces came through by the end of the game. Deshaun Watson had 2 rushing touchdowns and 44 rushing yards, 292 passing yards and a touchdown. And DeAndre Hopkins had 13 targets for 120 yards and a touchdown. So if you stacked them a lot like I did, you kind of lucked out, even though that game was weird. Watson's been about 3 times the NFL average in per play efficiency this season. I don't really worry about him. He does have dud games, and a lot of them have come at home this year, which is kind of strange, but he can make up for it on the ground. He still had almost 300 yards passing, so I'm not really changing my view on Deshaun Watson here. DeAndre Hopkins paced the team with 13 targets in a game with no Will Fuller. Jordan Akins had 9 targets. Kiki Cutie and Duke Johnson each had 8. Kenny Stills, our boy, just 2 targets. He's an all-or-nothing option, even without Fuller, so just keep that in mind. Don't load up on Kenny Stills. I'm telling myself I can play this back in my head moving forward.
I need that too.
DeAndre Hopkins is great, but even in games without Fuller, since Kenny Stills kind of had his role grow, Hopkins has a 34% target share, so he's a monster. But nobody else really stands out. Kiki Cutie's at 15%, Duke Johnson at 14%, Stills at 13%. So, again, it's really just DeAndre Hopkins for me in this offense outside of their quarterback. Carlos Hyde, 53% of the snaps. Duke Johnson, 52%. Moved out as a receiver kind of often, 11 snaps there. But neither do enough for me in DFS, especially on a half PPR site like FanDuel. I know that we talk about receiving being important, but I want Duke Johnson to be I want it to be an early down back who gets receiving production, and that neither of these guys are those things. They're at the Titans in Week 15, so they're clearly going to have to score to keep up with Ryan Tannehill and the Tennessee offense.
What a wild world we live in. Let's go back to Courtland Sutton here because I think that he is clearly the top guy here. The Chiefs defense, and we'll talk about this in the Patriots section, they're underrated, I would say. Like, they're better than their perception against the pass. But Sutton, I think, doesn't matter as much about matchups with him, but we could have the concern about Drew Lock spreading things around. So name that starter for Courtland Sutton next week on the road in a tough environment against Kansas City.
I would want it to be down from where it had been, probably somewhere around $6,800. I don't think that he's like back into the huge chasm of like $65,000 to $6,000 receivers. I think he's better than that, but I don't think he's a $7,000 plus receiver right now.
I think he's exactly 7,000 for me. I can't really go above that for the reasons you mentioned, but he is exactly 7,000 for next week against. Yeah, for against Chiefs. Like, I will have game stacks of that game, and Sutton will go really well in that. Checking out other guys, Philip Lindsay is 64, and Noah Fant is 57. So hopefully he is as healthy as he thinks he is, because that'd still be a good salary for him, I think, personally.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on here to Washington at Green Bay. We talked last week about the Packers trying to get Aaron Jones more work in the passing game, and it happened again this week. He led the team with 7 targets. That is his most since Devontae Adams' injury, or return, I should say. 2 of those targets for Jones were deep, which is wild for a running back, and 1 was in the red zone. If we look at the 2 games since they said they wanted to get Jones the ball more, he has 22% of the team's targets, which is significant. He played 58% of the snaps, and that's the same where he was last week. And I think that means we can put more trust in his role going forward. In those 2 games, Jones has averaged 13.5 carries and 6.5 targets per game. That would work out to be 26.5 adjusted opportunities per game. Not a huge number, but it's a lot better than he was. I would say we've got to keep expectations in check for Jones, but the arrow continues to be slightly up on him as a DFS play. Devontae Adams didn't do a whole lot here, but they were up early and seemed to coast from there on out. He has 26% of the targets in the past 2 games, and they'll be in better paced matchups in the future. Like, they're a slow paced team themselves, which means that when they're facing a slow team, I don't really want to go there. But I would say the only change for me is boosting Aaron Jones a tiny bit there. Another bummer for Washington here. Darius Guy suffered a knee injury again. Didn't return. It wouldn't really open up value in a terrible team. Just kind of stinks that Geis is hurt again because he's been really good. With Geis missing most of the game, Adrian Peterson had 20 carries for 76 yards and a touchdown. No targets for him, though. Chris Thompson returned, and he kind of ensured that Peterson will not get targets in the future. So I'm not going to use Peterson unless there is something drastic. The only good thing about Washington is that they kept the target tree tight. Thompson led with 8 targets, then Terry McLaurin and Steven Sims Jr. had 7. Calvin Harmon was next with 4, and nobody else had any. In the 5 games with Haskins at quarterback, McLaurin has 25% of the targets, but with how run-heavy they are, that's just 6.6 targets per game. He can hit, as he did against Green Bay, but he'll have to do it on minimal volume unless they get in a big hole early. It's just not a fun team in any sense, and I don't like using them. I hate slow teams. I hate teams that want to run the ball, and Washington fits both to a T, so I don't – even with guys missing time, unfortunately, I don't want to go there. What about Aaron Jones, Brandon? Because I am always – not always. We've actually been pretty even on him from a salary perspective recently. What would you view his role being going forward, given what we've seen in the past 2 games?
I mean, the deep targets are like something. But, I mean...
He got those before, too. It's just he's going back to that.
Yeah, I mean, I just struggle with Aaron Jones because I never trust it. No matter what I see, I don't trust that any increase in usage is going to stick.
Yeah.
But it's not like he has terrible usage to begin with. The offense can move the ball. This week was really strange. I was still up on Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams. I thought that they would move the ball better, but they kind of didn't. So for Aaron Jones,
they just kind of gave up.
Yeah, it was like,
I mean, like, that's a risk when you're facing such a bad team, but like, they just gave up.
I'm not tilting or anything. Like, that's not what this is. But
right.
I think Aaron Jones, honestly, about the same as I have been.
Okay.
Is that wrong?
Well, I mean, the targets are very different than they were. So I think that you should be different on him. You can still be below consensus, but I think you should be higher on him than you were.
I guess that's kind of where I am. Below consensus, probably.
I think that's fine.
What price are you thinking then?
So they're at home against Chicago next week. if you give me 13 carries and 7 targets against Chicago at home, I would probably put that around, I would say like 75 or 72. So well, let's go 75, I think.
Okay. Would you project him for 7 targets, or do you think that's the high end of his outcome?
Maybe like 5.5. I think that his workload, like increased
Okay.
passing game work, is legitimate. It's probably not what it's been the past 2 games, but I would say it's legit.
Maybe that's where we're differing. But I mean,
I mean, they said they were going to do it, and they did it.
Yeah.
Like, I think that makes it more legit.
Yeah, absolutely. I struggle with Aaron Jones, and I always will, no matter what. It's just one of those biases that I have. So
yeah,
I'd still put him at, like, I think the lower end of what you said, 72.
Okay. He is 78, same what he was this week. That's fine. I'll still use him. Like the
cash
floor
games. No. Are you that? Or, okay.
No.
Okay. Well, you're buying into the passing game usage, the uptick. Right. So I'm just asking.
No. He's still got a 60% snap rate. Like there are still flaws in his game, but the ceiling is still there. And so I'm still going to use him in tournaments. I'm not going to go there in cash games though.
I think that's the thing for me. He's not like any back who's not a cash game option, but still has like paths to upside. Is just they're all in the same bucket for me.
Okay, that's fair. He would be in that bucket for me. I just like those guys more than you do. It sounds like.
I mean, it's not like I don't like those guys. It's just like, am I going to play him in a cash game? No. Then am I going to play him some in tournaments? Then yeah, a lot of these guys fit that bill. Okay, but I don't think he stands out necessarily relative to everyone else in that.
I think he does because his offense has higher touchdown ability, which means he's more likely to hit the high end of his range of outcomes than a lot of guys in that bucket. I think that's the difference there. Let's move now to the Chargers at the Jaguars. Woof. I don't know what went on here. Again, Nick Foles should have played better defense for the Jaguars. What'd you see in this game?
The Jaguars defense revived Phillip Rivers, who had 314 yards and 3 touchdowns on just 22 pass attempts. That's 1.09 passing net expected points per drop back. The NFL average is 0.08. So, I mean, just think on average, 6 dropbacks get you a touchdown. That's absurd, based on what Rivers did. So, despite 20 touchdowns and 15 picks, Rivers has plus efficiency on the year, doubling the NFL average. So, I mean, he's been good, and I've used him, but I can't really trust this offense no matter what we saw this week. And Tyrod Taylor came in late because of the blowout. Keenan Allen led with 6 targets, which always is not fun when your lead target guy gets 6 targets. Austin Eckler and Melvin Gordon had 5. Hunter Henry had 4. Mike Williams had 3. So, again, that's just tough. Eckler did score on an 84-yard catch and run, so that does inflate Phillip Rivers. I know that. But Mike Williams got his first touchdown of the year, basically just grabbed touchdown regression into his own hands and made sure he got that touchdown. Hunter Henry scored. Since week 9 and their coordinator changed, Keenan Allen does lead with a 25% target share. Henry's at 21%. Eckler is at 17%. Mike Williams at 14%. And Melvin Gordon at 12%. The deep targets in that sample are 11 for Mike Williams, which is noteworthy, 7 for Henry, and 6 for Keenan Allen. I still think the right order is Keenan Allen, Hunter Henry, and then Mike Williams. So status quo on the pass catchers, I guess. For me, maybe Henry over Allen because he's a tight end, but either way, it's kind of fine. Melvin Gordon led with a 12-8 carry split over Austin Eckler. Each had 5 targets, as I mentioned. Eckler had 213 total yards and a touchdown on 12 touches. Gordon had 84 yards and a touchdown of his own, 17 touches for him. Gordon's been dominating the carries 88-40 in this sample, but Eckler gets more of the receiving work. So I still think Gordon's the preference, but maybe Austin Eckler earned more work based on what he did this week. We don't know. They host the Vikings next week as 3-point home underdogs. For the Jaguars, just really frustrating here. 15 carries, 6 targets for Leonard Fournette. Total just 63 yards, no touchdowns. So he had a dud, but he still has no competition for any of the running back work. Just one of the best overall workloads for a running back. Just doesn't score, hasn't been scoring. It's eventually going to correct, we think. But if Gardner Minshew keeps playing the way that he's playing, then the scoring chances could be scarce. He has negative 0.25 passing net expected points per dropback and a 35% passing success rate in his over the past 2 weeks. You don't need me to tell you that those are not good numbers. DJ Chark led with 10 targets. Dede Westbrook had 7. Fournette was third with 6, followed by Nick O'Leary with 5. Gardner Minshew's target distribution since returning last week at halftime: 13 for Fournette and Chark, 12 for Westbrook, 7 for Nick O'Leary and Chris Conley, and his average target depth in that sample, 3.8 yards downfield. Which again, you don't need me to tell you that, but it's terrible. The league low for a starter is about 6.3. That's Drew Brees. So DJ Chark had a boot on his foot and was scooted out of the locker room, so he might be looking at time missed, which would open up some opportunity for, I guess, D.D. Westbrook, but they just don't throw the ball downfield, so it kind of kills the offense. They're at the Raiders next week, so it could be a good offense, but I don't know if they're going to be more than like 5 downfield passes combined in that game.
Yeah. Let's talk about Austin Eckler, because he doesn't fit the mold of like anybody else. Like, I try to get like comps from a usage perspective. There is no comp for Austin Eckler because he gets like unique targets. It's not just like a dump off. Like, he's getting unique targets. So like, is he someone like, I don't know. I can't figure him out. And I think that's a compliment to him that there is like no parallel for him. But like, it makes it very hard for me to conceptualize what I want to do with him. So name that salary for Austin Eckler, because like, I have a really hard time knowing what to think of this guy.
Yeah, I had the number $6,700 in my head.
I did too, actually.
I feel like that's going to be low.
So next week against Minnesota, he is 72. Melvin Gordon is 74. Like, I agree that Gordon should be more expensive, but like, it's hard to like, I don't know. He's just like such a unique case.
I think they're both overpriced, honestly. Sure. A little bit.
I think that's right.
Especially for that matchup. But yeah, if I could play Eckler instead of a third receiver or something, like
4 running backs.
But it's really hard to play Austin Eckler as a running back when I think his like carry ceiling is like 8 to 10.
Right. And I think that's like a legitimate concern. If we look at like his just fantasy output, not his usage, 29.3, 14.7, 17.2, 11.8, 11.3. This was his first big game since the coordinator change. So I don't think we have to go there. But big games like that are within his range of outcomes, and I think that's worth acknowledging. But it's still, I don't view him as a priority, but like, he is, I think, the guy I have the hardest time diagnosing in all of DFS.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't dug in completely, but no rushing touchdowns in that sample. Does have 3 receiving touchdowns in his past 4 games, 2 100-yard receiving games. I mean, he's just like a really unique case. I feel like, don't fight me about this, anybody, but like, I feel like it's like an Alvin Kamara type of thing back, when Kamara was such a low usage guy, but would just have like crazy receiving work. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean,
not Alvin Kamara now.
No. There are similarities. Like, there's overlap. And I understand where you're coming from.
The offense is different.
Yeah. I don't know. He's really tough, but he's really good too. So it's hard to diagnose. He's a very good player. It's just hard for me to like wrap my head around him. I don't know. It's tough, but he's really good. It's very difficult. I will say that. Let's move now to Kansas City at New England. When we were talking on the Thursday podcast about this Patriots defense, we mentioned that when they faced top half passing offenses this year, those teams have averaged 0.10 passing net expected points per dropback. That's exactly where Patrick Mahomes wound up being yesterday. And it kind of means that we can go at offenses facing the Patriots for sure. We just have to lower expectations for them, and they shouldn't be the Bengals. It can be good offenses against the Patriots, not the Bengals. The other good thing here is that they kept the targets pretty tight with Travis Kelce getting 9 targets, while Tyreek Hill and Sammy Watkins had 8. In the 3 games with all 3 of those guys healthy, Hill leads with 30% of the overall targets. Kelce's at 22%. Watkins is at 17%. Hill has 55% of the deep targets and 3 of 9 red zone targets. He is a monster. Kelce has not gotten as much deep work, but he's doing enough to be worth his salary. And Watkins is at least an option. It's a very shaky option, but he's an option. And I think that Hill is someone we will want to be very in on going forward, because that target share is disgusting, and he's tied to a good quarterback. It sounds like Mahomes' hand should be okay. Keep an eye on that, but like, I want to buy Tyreek Hill going forward based on the usage he's had in this 3-game sample. In the backfield, even with both Damian and Darrell Williams out, LaShawn McCoy, still not a bell cow. He led a committee with 11 carries and 3 targets. Darwin Thompson had 4 carries and 5 targets. Spencer Ware got work off the street. I think that when we're looking at this backfield, Damian Williams is the only guy who can be fantasy viable when healthy. Everyone else, it's going to be a committee. When Williams is healthy, maybe. We'll have to see on that if he's back next week. Tom Brady really, really struggled here. He lost 16.25 passing net expected points. The Chiefs' defense is, again, better than perception. That's worth noting. But it's really bad efficiency, and they're not going to get many pieces back to help the offense down the stretch. Outside of getting their center Ted Karras back, this is what they'll have the rest of the way, and I don't think the concerns here are unfounded. I think we can use this team against the Bengals, but the past 2 weeks have been, I think that when you consider injuries and context, the past 2 games have been the worst for the Patriots offense all year long. We were wondering if the Patriots would try to ground and pound. They tried, but they couldn't. It led to Sonny Michel dissolving while James White and Rex Burkhead got more work. White had 6 carries and 7 targets. Burkhead had 7 carries. I'm going back to ignoring this backfield almost no matter what. Outside of White's 7 targets, Edelman was the only other guy with more than 4. He had 12 targets, which gives him double digits in 8 straight. He has had multiple deep targets in 4 straight games. Edelman's the only guy you can really trust here. Nobody else played more than 63% of the snaps. Sanu was the guy at 63%. Then it was Jacoby Myers. Then it was Philip Dorsett. N'Keal Harry played 4 snaps. So they're just rotating dudes. It's Edelman on this team right now, and I can't really talk myself into anybody else. But they're facing Cincinnati next week, Brandon. Like, we have to go with the Patriots there, I think. What's your sentiment on this offense right now?
Well, all the Julian Edelman for next week. Everything else, I think I'm going to need some time to step back and, like, really think about it, because nobody else particularly stands out. Like, this is rough, and I don't want to be dismissive of any offense, any full team, even on a full 13 game slate. And I'm not saying that I'm dismissing this offense outside of Edelman, but you probably don't have to play any of these guys because the ceilings seem pretty low because of how they spread things out. So,
because the efficiency's way down.
Yeah. So outside of Edelman, I might be fine, like, not really playing a lot of New England guys.
Would you use Tom Brady?
Probably. Name that salary in that matchup.
I already looked.
Okay.
He's 76.
Then
that's fine. He's not a cash game play, and he's not a priority. And if I'm going through my player pool and I'm like, I don't want to spread things out more, I'm okay omitting him right now. It's just like, I think that, like, again, I was okay with them before because they had a lot of injuries. Now, outside of Karras, everyone's back. I don't know what to do there.
I think you have to play some Tom Brady in that matchup.
Yeah, probably. I don't want to.
If you're building a lot of lineups, if you're someone who builds like 5 lineups, then no. But
yeah, you have your 5 Drew Lock lineups, and you don't have any room for Tom Brady. So he's not a priority right now. It's so hard. Like, again, I think the past 2 weeks have been the biggest disappointments for me. And Edelman's great. Julian Edelman's awesome. He is 77. Totally cool with that. Cash game option, tournament option, fine. Everyone else, really not super inclined to go there. Let's move now to Tennessee and Oakland. Maybe we could swap quarterbacks here and get how the Patriots return to relevancy with Ryan Tannehill at quarterback. I'm joking. Please do not get mad at me. Do not send me your address, which has happened before. Don't get mad at me. I'm joking. But Ryan Tannehill is playing well.
He is, and I think, maybe we're late on this train. I know that we are.
I'm late. I know that.
I don't know if everyone's late. Maybe I think he's got in.
He's got a lot of pub this week. I thought it was a little interesting because it's still Tannehill, but like the sample keeps getting bigger and he's still balling out, and he looks good. I just kind of thought it would come crashing back to earth eventually, and it hasn't yet. So kudos to him.
Yeah, 391 yards, 3 touchdowns. If you look at the full season now for Tannehill, he's up to 0.24 passing net expected points per drop back. NFL average 0.08. Hate to do it to you, but Marcus Mariota, just for context, was at 0. So it's a huge deviation for this offense. It is a big shift overall. A.J. Brown erupted this week, 153 yards and 2 touchdowns on 7 targets. Nobody else had more than 4 targets, though. But Corey Davis, Jonnu Smith, and Tajay Sharp all had 4. In 6 games with Tannehill and with Corey Davis in the lineup, A.J. Brown leads with a 20.7% target share. Davis is at 16.5%. Over the past 3 games, it's been a little bit more concentrated with A.J. Brown up to a 25% target share. Davis is second at 14%. So really, this offense is, I guess, easy to stack because it's Tannehill to A.J. Brown and nobody else is super involved. So I just don't think that anyone else is viable. Derrick Henry just, I guess, can't be stopped. 2 more touchdowns for him, 103 yards on 18 carries. Just 1 targets, but I guess it doesn't matter if you're walking into the end zone. He's a monster in positive script. This offense has been rolling, and that is very significant. They host the Texans next week. They are 3-point favorites. The total is 48.5. So could be Derrick Henry again. I don't know. I don't like to play Derrick Henry, but I think I have to. For the Raiders, this is kind of a quick one. No Josh Jacobs. This is just not a fun DFS offense. Derek Carr had 263 yards, so still no 300-yard games for him. Low ceiling offense. His average target depth is 6.8 yards. The past 2 games, no Hunter Renfrow. The targets have favored Darren Waller at 26%, DeAndre Washington at 18%, Tyrell Williams at 14%, and 11% for Zay Jones. It's Waller, then it's Tyrell Williams, full tier below, and then kind of nobody else. Jacobs missed because of his shoulder injury. He seemed pretty sad about that. I guess he got a shot so that he could play and wasn't able to play anyway. But DeAndre Washington stepped in for 21 opportunities, had 96 total yards and a touchdown, played 65% of the snaps, and so he basically had Josh Jacobs' role with better receiving. He had 7 targets. They host the Jaguars in Week 15. I'm going to hate that game. The total is only 44.5. I don't think there's going to be many downfield shots. This could be a really dud game for next week.
Yeah, Jacobs will probably play, but if Washington were to play again, like that'd be a really intriguing role to have. So hopefully Jacobs is okay. I'd like to watch him play, but I think that we'd be in on Washington if not. Let's go back to the Titans here, specifically A.J. Brown. I think we know where we're at on Derrick Henry. You have to use him because he's just too good not to use him. But what about A.J. Brown? Because the targets, as you mentioned, have been more concentrated recently. It is still a low volume passing offense, but name that salary for A.J. Brown at home against Texans.
I'm going to be probably low. I still don't really want to pay more than I think he's still in that $6,000 to $6,500 quagmire situation for receivers, but probably on the higher end, so I'll say 65.
Yeah, I was thinking 6,000 because I just I have a mental block about using passing game guys in this offense. He's 62. He's fine.
Okay.
That's fair. It's appropriate for his role. And you can consider him there because, like Brandon said, he has been getting a larger piece of the pie recently. But there are still concerns with the passing offense, and I would not go anybody else. Not from an efficiency perspective, but from a volume perspective. They're kind of turning into the Seahawks, which is weird. And I don't want to equate anybody to, because Russell Wilson is what makes the Seahawks fine despite the low volume. But Tannehill's been efficient. It's low volume. We can use a guy in that offense, and I think that A.J. Brown is getting enough where I'm buying in. I'm behind the wheel, but I don't want to double down on a mistake. So I think at 62, he's fine. I think that's what I would say there. Let's move now to Pittsburgh at Arizona. The Steelers got a win here, but they were predictably frustrating. Benny Snell had 16 carries, but that was out of 28 total for the running backs. He had no targets. You cannot use him. Jalen Samuels had 7 carries and 2 targets. You cannot use him either. I would avoid this backfield until James Conner gets back, and even then, I would proceed with caution. Then they didn't throw to really any of the pass catchers enough to make us like them. Deontay Johnson, though, with 8 targets. He had 2 touchdowns, 1 on a punt return, but they threw just 19 total times for 135 yards. James Washington had 4 targets. Johnson actually has more targets since Hodges took over than his duck blind buddy, but there's no upside here at all. I don't want to touch either dude. Christian Kirk got back to playing well here with 8 receptions for 85 yards on 9 targets. Larry Fitzgerald was the only guy with more than 3 targets. Kirk has 27% of the overall targets and 38% of the deep targets since coming back from the injury. Kirk is the focal point in this offense, and other teams know that. We have to account for that for their game planning, but he is the premier guy for fantasy here by a mile. Kenyon Drake continued to lead the backfield here with 11 carries and 3 targets. David Johnson, 3 carries and 2 targets, though one was a touchdown. Drake's snap rate, though, fell to 66.7%. That is the lowest for him since the first game that he and Johnson played together. Johnson played 37% of the snaps. Chase Edmonds played 23%. A lot of guys were a wide receiver here. I think that Drake's lead over the backfield may be dwindling, which is something that we did note could happen. It's enough for me to downgrade him, and I don't really want to use this backfield for the time being. But that game with Cleveland is pretty intriguing next week. I think the better route, though, Brandon, is to use Christian Kirk. So name that salary for Christian Kirk at home against Cleveland next week.
64.
Really? Interesting. I thought you would be higher.
I typically am, but I'm having Christian Kirk fatigue because I play him every week.
But he was really good on Sunday. There was no problem with playing him.
64.
94. Do it.
Okay.
Fight. I would probably put Christian Kirk closer to 68 or 7,000, I guess. I just love the target numbers. I love that he gets deep work. I love that I know that he's going to be the guy in this offense.
Yeah.
So I think he's worth almost 7,000, and I don't have to pay that because he is $6,100. In game stacks, in game stacks, he helps offset the cost of Jarvis Landry, which is great.
Yeah. I mean, I love Christian Kirk's workload. I want to make that clear. Any problems with individual matchups, and I think I get a little bit nervous now because he's faced some tough individual matchups lately, and I know that he can come through, but I just want to make sure that I'm not overspending on Christian Kirk right now.
$9,400 or bust. That's where I'm at on Christian Kirk. He's going to be awesome next week, and I cannot wait to use him. They have good corners, Cleveland does, but I don't care. He's fine. I'm going to do it. Let's move now to Seattle at Los Angeles. Jared Goff back from the crypt. What'd you see in this game? And I will note, you did not see Cooper Kupp because he was barely on the field. What'd you see here?
Yeah, I mean, Malcolm Brown stole an early touchdown, but Todd Gurley had 23 carries and 4 catches for 113 total yards and a touchdown. Reports surfaced that Gurley will be leaned on more down the stretch. That is, quote unquote, pitch count would be gone. Played 81% of the snaps, so that's nice. And in terms of the raw snap volume, which I think matters maybe for someone like Gurley, he's played at least 50 snaps in 4 of his 5 post-bye games, so he's out there a ton. And we can probably keep moving him up the board. I will be doing that. Jared Goff, 293 yards and 2 touchdowns, 2 picks against a kind of mid-level defense overall, once adjusted. One that doesn't get a ton of pressure. So, I mean, Jared Goff in a non-terrible matchup played well. Goff was good, but the target distribution kind of weird. 11 for Tyler Higbee, 9 for Robert Woods, 4 for Cooper Kupp and Todd Gurley, 2 empty targets for Brandon Cooks. Woods played every snap. Josh Reynolds played 67% of the snaps. Brandon Cooks played 39%, and Cooper Kupp played 28%. Apparently it was like a game plan thing, but Kupp wasn't out there early. I don't know how many good game plans. I mean, they won, so I guess can't knock it, but I don't know how Cooper Kupp's irrelevant. I don't know.
He did drop a pass that led to a pick 2 weeks ago, which made me very sad. He also fumbled twice the game before that. I'm not saying that he got benched. I'm just saying that I don't think it's a fluke.
Yeah, and I mean, his target share was great through, I think, the first 5 weeks, and then it had really trended down. So Cooper Kupp's been priced up a ton. I don't think he should be that anymore. I think he's back in, well, I'll give you some numbers first, and then I'll give my takeaway. But in 3 games with Gerald Everett out or limited and Brandon Cooks healthy, Robert Woods leads with 34% of the targets. Higbee's at 23%, Kupp's at 18%. Nobody else has a double-digit target share. And, assuming that Everett continues to miss, I think that maybe it's Woods and Higbee. I don't know fully what's going on, but Kupp could be dealing with an injury. Again, you said he could be just in the doghouse a little bit, but Cooks has been mostly unusable, and I think right now Robert Woods has to be the number one. I could I don't know. That's how I view it.
Let's talk more about it at the end here.
All right. They're at the Cowboys in Week 15. I'll talk quickly about the Seahawks here. Rashad Penny left with a knee injury after one snap. Didn't look good. Ruled out very quickly. Probably going to miss some time, but I don't know that for sure. Chris Carson played 88% of the snaps, had 15 carries and 4 targets. Should have a workhorse role again without Penny, just in time for a matchup with the Panthers, who do not stop the run. Russell Wilson had his first game without a passing touchdown all year and now has 4 straight games with fewer than 18 FanDuel points. Has faced some tough pass defenses overall. His 245 yards on Sunday night, actually a high for this 4-game span. So, it's always easy to get enamored with what Russell Wilson can do, but doesn't always unleash it, and that's kind of problematic. And on top of that, he's spreading out targets. He gave 6 to DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and Jacob Hollister, 5 to Josh Gordon. Gordon played almost 60% of the snaps here, his first game for the team with more than 40%. Metcalf and Lockett, they were fine in terms of snap shares, but I think the market share issues could be legitimate here. This is a low-volume pass offense. In 3 games with Gordon on the team in a limited role, Metcalf leads with 22% of the targets, but that's only 6.3 per game. Jacob Hollister is actually second at 21%, and Tyler Lockett, I guess, was sick last week, but 13% of the targets the past 3 games. Metcalf might be the number 1. I can't trust any of them. Again, they're at Carolina next week, so they'll probably just run the ball like 100 times. But let's talk about the Rams and let me know what you see.
Yeah, so I think that Cooper Kupp struggling and actually making some bad plays recently is noteworthy because it makes me feel like this could be stickier, and it makes me far less likely to ignore this. So I think that when we're looking at quote-unquote most relevant samples for this Rams team, we do have to focus on those 3 games you talked about with Gerald Everett, missing time. And I think that Woods is I would expect him to keep being a target monster in this offense. And I want to bump him up big time. And I can't justify using Cooks or Kupp. I may be more inclined to use Josh Reynolds than either of those guys based on what we saw last night. He had some rush. I think he had 3 rush attempts in that game. Reynolds did. And they're scheming to get the ball in Robert Woods' hand. And I think that is impactful and noteworthy. And given that the offense played really well with a lot of usage for Woods and Reynolds, it's hard for me to expect them to change things up next week. So I don't see Cooper Kupp landing in my player pool next week, even though you can beat the Cowboys through the slot. I'd rather just go Robert Woods. And I think that Cooper Kupp, I'm not going to use him again until I get a reason to do so. I'm okay missing out if he has a big game, but I'm not going to use him again until I get a reason to do so.
Yeah, the usage. I mean, it's really hard to play someone at what his salary is going to be. I mean, we know it's going to be elevated still with his usage, so I'm fine missing out, like you said.
He's 76. Robert Woods is 75. Woods is awesome there. I love Brandon Cooks, but I can't use him either because, again, the snap rates were low. He apparently, Sean McVay was yelling at him for his route on Goff's long ball pick. So I don't really expect the snap rate to be super high either there. So I think it's Robert Woods and Tyler Higbee, and that's it right now. Higbee's 57. I think that's appropriate if Everett continues to miss. And he was also out snapping Everett in that game where Everett got hurt. So I think that Higbee at 57 and Woods at 75 are both very viable.
Yeah.
Kupp is not.
Yeah. Reynolds is 54. What a weird time. What a weird time for the Rams.
Yeah. I was very mad at Cooper Kupp because he gave Jared Goff an interception he did not deserve. I did not think that was result in his benching, but he was on the poop list already, and now he's in the poop list for a very different reason. Jared Goff, 78. On the road in Dallas next week. I'll probably use him. Why not? He's back. That is all that we have for today. We're going to preview the Week 15 and main slate coming up on Thursday to get you set for a pretty fun slate, I think, based on the initial look. There are some games I want to stack, and I'm pretty excited to break those down. We'll do that on Thursday. Make sure you subscribe to the Number Fire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. Wherever you get your podcast, just search for the Number Fire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Stitcher, anywhere else you get your podcast too. And while you're there, please leave a rating and review as well. Brandon, if people have questions for you on Twitter, where can they find you there?
I'm at Gadula13, GDULA13.
And I am at Jim Sannes, JimSannes. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald from the video side of things for today. Thank you, Cal, as always, for doing that and chopping up the clips to the at FanDuel Twitter account. And thank you to everyone for tuning in for today. Hopefully, Week 14 went better for you than it did for me. We'll talk to you again on Thursday to get you set for Week 15. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by Number Fire.